You never think about the heat that comes through your vents. But before central heating, an ordinary winter indoors could freeze a family to death. And every year it did. Not on some distant battlefield. In the houses people lived in the kitchens where they cooked, the bedrooms where they slept. This is how they survived the cold that used to rule their homes, and what it cost them. On the evening of December 21st, 1797, a man named John Innes Clark sat down in the dining room of his house in Providence, Rhode Island, and noted the temperature. A fire was burning in the room. He had wood in the hearth, and the hearth was the only source of heat in the house. The thermometer on the wall read 48 degrees Fahrenheit, 8 degrees above freezing, with a good fire going. The dining room of a comfortable merchant's home, in the middle of a New England winter, was sitting at 48 degrees, while the rest of the house, the bedrooms, the upstairs chambers, the hallway, was colder. This was not a poor family. Clark was a man of comfortable means. This was an ordinary American winter evening in a house with a fire. William Bentley kept a thermometer by his bed. In January of 1810, in Salem, Massachusetts, Bentley recorded that the side of his bedroom farthest from the brisk fire burning in the room below read 16 degrees Fahrenheit, 16 degrees below freezing, in his bedroom, while a fire burned in the next room down, heating the parlor. That bedroom was unheated. The fire lived in one room, and that room was not the bedroom. A study of reconstructed Saxon long halls from early medieval England found that even with a central hearth burning through the day, indoor temperatures seldom rose more than 4 to 6 degrees Celsius above the outside air. A house in winter with a fire going might sit at 45 degrees Fahrenheit inside, while it was 38 outside. The fire was not warming the house. The fire was making the house survivable. The cold that came indoors in winter was the same cold that ruled outside the door, modified only by what one fire, sometimes two, could throw into one room while leaving every other room standing in something close to outdoor air. The reason is built into the device. An open fireplace is, mechanically, an air exchanger. It pulls warm room air up the chimney and replaces it with cold air drawn in through every crack in the walls, every gap under the door. It radiates heat to the people sitting directly in front of it. To anyone else in the room, the effect is small. To the rest of the house, the effect is essentially zero. Engineers who study historic homes put the efficiency of an open fireplace at less than 20%. 80% of the heat goes straight up the chimney. The remaining 20% does not travel down the hallway to the bedroom at the end of it. In colonial American kitchens, fireplaces were built 8 feet wide and 3 or 4 feet deep from hearth to back wall, and the family gathered within their radius to cook, eat, wash, and talk. The cook walked to the back of the fireplace to use the brick bake oven. This was the warmest room in the house, the kitchen, and it was the only warm room. The bedrooms above were unheated. The parlor might have had a fireplace. The bedrooms upstairs had none. The fuel that fed these fires was a survival budget. Coal had to be bought and stored. Wood had to be cut in summer and dried for months. A family that did not plan its winter fuel by late summer was a family that froze by January. The cold did not just arrive. It was something a household spent the better part of the year preparing to fight. A family of 6 in winter lived in 1 or 2 rooms, packed close to the heat, and treated the rest of the house as outdoor temperature. They did not move freely through a warm house. They lived in the warm room. If the fire could only warm one room, the entire architecture of daily life bent toward it. Schedules, sleeping arrangements, social life, the shape of the house itself, all of it was organized around a single heat source that was always rationed and never quite enough. The fuel came first. Families did not have money to keep a fire burning through the night. The standard practice for hundreds of years across Europe and colonial America was to bank the fire before bed. You raked the embers together, covered them with ash, and left them to smolder through the night. The idea was that the embers would still be alive in the morning, and someone could revive the fire by adding fresh kindling before dawn. The fire was rationed. It was never left to burn freely. Even when there was fuel, burning it all night meant the family had no fire in the morning. So the fire went to sleep, banked in ash, and someone had to wake before the sun to coax it back. The bed was the second line of defense, and it was engineered as a survival object. Across much of northern Europe, families slept in box beds, wooden enclosures with sliding doors that trapped body heat inside the bed itself. In rural Brittany, the box bed remained the main furniture of rural houses into the 20th century. In a house with one heated room, the box bed was the second heated room. It was the warmest place in the house. People climbed into it together, pulled the doors shut, and slept in a small pocket of warmth their own bodies had made. The historian Roger Ekirch, who spent 2 decades reconstructing the texture of pre-industrial sleep, found that for most ordinary Europeans well into the 19th century, sleeping alone was unusual. A bedmate was the norm. Travelers shared beds with strangers they met at inns. Families slept in one bed in birth order, with the mother and sisters on one side and the father and brothers on the other, followed by the odd guest or traveling peddler. The bed was a community. It was warm because it had to be warm, and it was warm because there were enough bodies in it. The night itself was not something you slept through passively. Ekirch's research, drawn from hundreds of pre-industrial references, found that Europeans commonly slept in 2 shifts, a first sleep beginning about 2 hours after dusk, then a period of wakefulness around midnight, then a second sleep until dawn. The intervening period was called the watch. People got up, they prayed, they talked, they checked on the children, and in a household where the fire had to survive the night banked in ash, someone tended the embers. The watch was not an inefficiency of pre-modern sleep. It was the schedule the cold made necessary. The bed warmer was the third line of defense. It was a metal pan with a lid and a long handle. You filled it with embers from the fire, closed the lid, and slid it between the sheets to warm the bed before you climbed in. The pan was heavy. The embers smelled of wood smoke. The metal got very hot, and it scorched sheets. And sometimes, it set the bed on fire. Period medical writers advised against them, or, if a household had to use one, recommended filling it with hot sand instead. The bed warmer was not a luxury. It was the only way a cold bedroom became a survivable one. The 4-poster bed, the heavy curtains drawn around the frame, was the 4th line of defense, and the curtains were not decoration. They were insulation. The bed was the warmest place in the house. The curtains held the warmth in. Strip away the velvet, and what you had was a small, enclosed, body-heated room inside a cold house. The medieval Great Hall pulled all of this into one space. The fire burned in the middle of the room. Smoke escaped through a hole in the roof. The family lived, ate, worked, and slept around that one fire, within the radius where its heat reached. The Great Hall was not a cold exception. It was the warmest most people ever got. The hall was the architecture of the fight. A single room organized around a single fire with everything: cooking, eating, sleeping, conversation, courtship, prayer, happening inside that circle. This is the part that is hardest to recover, not the cold, which left its traces in furniture and architecture, but the social texture, the way an evening bent toward one room, the way a family stayed together because the cold made togetherness the only option, the way the entire rhythm of domestic life was organized around a fire that 1 or 2 people in the household spent their days feeding. The fire was where the family talked, where children learned the stories of the family, where marriages were discussed, where elders told the stories that became the myths. The single warm room was not just a survival space. It was the only social space. The architecture of the fight did not merely shape where people slept. It shaped how a family was a family. When the fireplace moved to the wall in the 16th century, the structure changed, but the logic did not. The warm room was the only warm room. The bedrooms, the service rooms, the upstairs chambers remained unheated. The family lived in the parlor or the kitchen and treated the rest of the house as cold storage. This is the strangeness of pre-modern life that we have forgotten so completely that we now look at a four-poster bed and see romance instead of insulation. The strange normal was the entire architecture of a civilization built around one fire. The cold did not treat everyone equally. The fire, the box bed, the banked embers, the bed warmer. These were the architecture of survival. They worked for most people, most of the time. But every winter, the cold killed the ones the architecture could not protect. The very young, the very old, the poor, the ones whose bodies could not hold enough heat, or whose families had no money for fuel, or whose houses had no fire at all. A study of Sami populations in northern Sweden worked through 2 centuries of parish records between 1800 and 1895, the baptismal and burial entries of an entire people, and found that for Sami infants born during the cold winter months, when mean temperatures fell below about -15 degrees Celsius, or roughly 5 degrees Fahrenheit, the neonatal mortality rate was 1.6 times higher than for infants born in medium temperature months. A baby born into the deep cold of a Sami winter had a 60% higher chance of dying in its first weeks of life than a baby born in a medium temperature month. This was not a battlefield. This was not an epidemic. This was an ordinary winter in an ordinary household, in a country with one of the most carefully documented demographic records in Europe. A separate study of childhood mortality found that winter periods carried 5.3% more infant deaths than non-winter periods, and 16.8% more deaths of children aged 1 to 9. Winter killed children, not always dramatically, not always in a single storm. It killed them slowly across the season, in homes where the fire did not reach the bedroom, in beds without enough bodies to warm them, in households that could not afford the fuel to keep the banked embers alive until morning. The numbers are even starker at the modern end of the record. In the winter of 2022 to 2023, the End Fuel Poverty Coalition estimated that around 4,950 people across the United Kingdom died as a result of cold homes, roughly 30 to 40 deaths a day across the winter months. The vulnerability has not gone away. We have just pushed it to the margins of how we think about winter. The mass death of winter campaigns puts a sharper edge on the same vulnerability. At Valley Forge, over the winter of 1777, roughly 2,000 of 12,000 Continental soldiers died, about 1 in 6. Most died of disease. But cold and malnutrition were the accelerants. Soldiers who were already sick died faster in tents that did not keep out the cold. A body that could have fought off typhoid in a warm room could not fight it off sleeping in frozen ground. The following winter was worse. The hard winter of 1779 to 1780 at Washington's second encampment at Morristown, New Jersey, exceeded Valley Forge in severity. Washington wrote that the frost exceeded anything of the kind that had ever been experienced in that climate. Snow fell for weeks, supply lines collapsed, soldiers starved. The cold did not kill them all, but it killed enough of them, and it killed them in ways that would not have happened indoors, in a warm room with a fire burning. The cold did not need a blizzard. It needed months of indoor temperatures barely above freezing, fuel that ran low by February, bodies diverting energy to staying warm instead of growing. A winter could kill a child not by frostbite, but by a chill that lasted just long enough to wear a small body down past the point of recovery. The body's logic is straightforward. Cold raises blood pressure, thickens the blood, suppresses the immune response, and stresses the heart. A cold home is a chronic stressor. A very cold home is a lethal one. The very young cannot regulate their body temperature. The very old cannot generate enough heat. The poor cannot afford fuel. Winter came every year, and every year it took the ones at the edges. The records show that in homes where the fire never quite warmed the bedroom, those edges were closer to the middle than we now imagine. The cost was not a secret. It was visible in the records year after year, in parish registers, and poor relief rolls across every cold country. The relief that ended this, central heating, the thermostat, the warm house, arrived late, incompletely, and at a cost. For most of human history, the warm house did not exist. It was not a forgotten technology waiting to be rediscovered. It had to be built, room by room, fuel by fuel, across decades. And the building of it was slower than you would expect. In 1970, only 31% of homes in the United Kingdom had central heating. By 2006, 91% did. The transformation happened inside the lifetime of people who are still alive. In the early 1960s, the majority of UK homes were still heated by coal. The fire in the parlor was not a historical artifact. It was the primary heat source for most British families, 20 years after the Second World War. Britain was slow, but it was not unique. Across Europe, the adoption of central heating was gradual. The first public housing estates with central heating were exceptional, and the rollout was driven less by the technology itself than by the slow disappearance of cheap coal and the slow arrival of natural gas. For most of the 20th century, the technology existed and most homes did not have it. The barrier was not invention. It was cost, infrastructure, and a sense that the existing arrangement of one warm room and a cold rest of the house was simply how houses were. In 1945, in an essay titled "The Case for the Open Fire," George Orwell made the case for the open fire. He argued that the open fire was a gathering point that central heating would replace, dispersing the family into separate rooms. He was not alone in this view. He believed the parlor with the fire was the social center of the household, the place the family gathered, the heart of domestic life. Spread the heat across every room, and you spread the family thin, each person retreating to their own warm bedroom. The fire as the gathering point would be lost. Orwell was writing at a moment when central heating was still a rarity, even in middle-class homes. The case he was making was a real case, not a nostalgic one. He was describing what was actually about to be lost. He was not entirely wrong. The architecture of the fight had shaped more than the house. It had shaped the family. When the warm room became the whole house, the living room lost its monopoly, and the bedroom became a place to relax, to entertain, to hang out alone. The room that used to be a survival space became a private one. But there was a darker cost to the slow arrival, and it is the part of the story that matters most. The way families stayed warm was itself killing them. In December of 1952, a weather inversion settled over London. Cold air sat under a layer of warm air, and the city's smoke could not rise. For 5 days, Londoners breathed coal smoke, and most of that smoke was not from factories. In 1952, the government's Committee on Air Pollution identified domestic coal fires as the single largest source of smoke in London, with house coal alone accounting for roughly a quarter of all coal burned in the capital. The smoke from those fires, multiplied across millions of chimneys, sat over the city and killed people. The official estimate of deaths from the Great Smog has been revised upward over the years. Initial figures put the toll at 4,000. Later estimates put it as high as 12,000. The 1956 Clean Air Act followed. The smoky fire in the parlor, the same fire that had warmed British families for centuries, was a mass killer when multiplied across a city in a still atmosphere. In the years that followed, Britain began rebuilding the way it heated. The 1956 Clean Air Act was the first step. Gas central heating spread across the country. Each step was a public health intervention disguised as a comfort upgrade. Central heating, when it finally arrived, was not just a comfort upgrade, it was a public health intervention. The thermostat was not a luxury. It was the device that let a family stay warm without burning coal in their front room. But this room used to be the coldest room in the house. It used to match the outdoors. People used to climb into it carrying a metal pan of embers, slide the pan between the sheets, wait for the bed to warm, then climb in beside a bedmate chosen for body heat rather than romance. Children slept in attics that were not heated at all. In one Swedish study spanning the 19th century, babies born in the deep cold had a 60% higher chance of dying in their first weeks of life. Soldiers in their own country froze in their tents. Londoners choked on the smoke from their own fires. You reach for the dial today without thinking. That is the final distance. The cold that once decided where a family slept, who in the family survived the winter, and what shape the house had to be. That cold is now a number on a thermostat that no one in the house remembers to set. If this made you look at your thermostat differently, drop a comment with the one everyday comfort you think people 100 years from now will forget the cost of. And subscribe to the Origin Portal for a new origin story every week.